Hello and welcome to our second Rugby World Cup warm-up recap podcast as Ireland walked home to a comfortable 29-10 win over a weary English side in Dublin on Saturday. Joining me this evening are two Irish and one English fan. Making his first appearance in the pod is contributor to the Gloucester Rugby fans Cherry Jam pod, Ed Price. Welcome to the pod, Ed.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you on. And joining him as well are two returnees to these shores. Making his third appearance, our Leinster representative, David Cordier. Welcome back, David.
Thank you, Kim.
And also returning for a second time is host of the Master of None podcast, the brilliant Stephen Murphy. Welcome back, Stephen.
Thank you very much. Brilliant. Well, that's the first person to call me brilliant. Thank you very much. Good to be here.
Well, I'm just making up for the Fan View podcast for those who remember. So, as part of these recap pods, I'll just start things off with a game in 60. Self-explanatory. Try and sum up the game in less than 60 seconds. So, another match, another win for Ireland, who are now 12 games unbeaten on the bounce, 16 straight on home soil following that comfortable 29-10 win over a floundering England in the Aviva Stadium on Saturday evening. Ireland made 4 wins in a row against their near rivals on a sunny and celebratory sunny Dublin day. Don't know why I have sunny in there twice, apologies. Tryson Bundyaki, Gary Ringrose, James Lowe and Mac Hansen set Ireland on their way to a landslide win, but one man held the moment. Keith Earls, on the day of his 100th cap, raised the roof during his pre-game and in-game arrivals before capping the emotional afternoon with his 36th international try. The Moyross Express has long been a fan favourite, but that try sent the attendees, players, Keith and Andy Farrell into a frenzy. Farrell's current 38-man squad are currently in Biarritz preparing for a final warm-up clash with Samoa on Saturday night in neighbouring Bayonne. However, at the time recording, Dan Sheehan has emerged as a major injury concern for the World Cup with a foot issue, with Jack Conan and Johnny Sexton also currently sidelined, and Ronan Keller a doubt as well. So that means Munster's Jimmer Barron has been called up to the squad. So, gentlemen, and I'll start with yourself, Ed. What was your thoughts on the game from Saturday, 2 days ago?
Again, thank you very much for having me on the pod. Not entirely sure how much I can swear, so I'm going to try and keep it to a minimum because it was that bad from an English point of view. Overall, Ireland thoroughly deserved it. Looked on it from minute one, and it's very difficult from an English point of view to kind of summarise it because obviously we only focus on the English side of things. But it was such a overwhelming performance by the Irish. Far better than I thought in the Six Nations. Again, I know it's different squads and they're not necessarily the squads you're going to go to the World Cup with, but they look far superior on every level. And just from my point of view, it's the little details. The Ireland weren't at 100% right. There was a few things, set piece still not quite right, I think, for Ireland. And that would be my major concern going into the World Cup for Ireland. But line out was a bit iffy, for example. Scrum was a bit hit and miss, but that's often with the refereeing. But I thought, the little details for Ireland look really good, certainly compared to England. And I would hope that Ireland, those injuries don't cause too many issues, because I think from an outsider's point of view, I actually think Ireland look better without Sexton, and I think that would be to have him not in the squad, at least in the first couple of games, will probably be a benefit.
Interesting thoughts from the outside, and obviously didn't get the memo about the Jack Crowley fan club committee, which I've been accused of being in recent times. So I'll pass it on to yourself, Stephen. Ed said it was dominant from minute one. Personally, I felt like it was Ireland at 70-80%. Where would you lie?
Yeah, I agree. I think it was in Ireland in full flow, but to be honest with you, it's a warm-up game. It's an England team where you've no idea where they're at, what the mindset, what the psyche's like. So it's tough. But look, the main thing was trying to get through with as little injuries as possible. We have the question mark over Dan Sheehan. Hopefully that's not a big thing, but everyone else seemed to come through a pretty clean bill of health, which was big because it was a strong team named out. So you had a lot of the big guns. Obviously, looking ahead to this week against Samoa, you're not going to see a lot of those guys, the guys you can't afford to lose. I think, I don't know, maybe this is just coming from an Irish fan who's a lot of scar tissue, but I was really fearing a really sloppy performance. Like, if you went out there and lost to a sloppy England team, the media that snowball starts to roll, and another disappointing quarterfinal loss or another disappointing World Cup. So it was great just to see a really clinical, professional performance, which we shouldn't be surprised now looking at Andy Farrell's Irish teams. But it was great to see that. They looked sharp. in areas where it counted. Handling was really, really good. Passes were really sharp when they needed to be. And they went out and defeated an English team that they should have defeated. And it was just it's exactly what I kind of wanted from them. It wasn't like super impressive where you're like, oh my god, like this is the fans get ahead of themselves, because again it's a warm-up game, but it wasn't sloppy either, so I wasn't worried with a kind of shitty performance. So overall I was very happy. It was, as you said, kind of in your summary there, it was the day was about Keith Earls. And it couldn't have been much better in terms of that. He came on, got a good chunk of time, scored a try, and everyone mostly got through with a clean bill of health. So from an Irish point of view, couldn't have went much better, really.
Yeah, pretty much as we would have asked for, although would prefer if Dan Sheehan didn't get injured on the most gracious part of rugby, which is the fun. But anyways, I'll pass it over to yourself, David. Pretty obvious what the two lads' sentiments are. Ireland cruising to victory against a poor England side. You were there, as was I. What did you make of it from the stands and upon watching back?
Yeah, I thought it was a I thought it was a solid performance from Ireland. I thought oftentimes the warm-up games in before the World Cup can get a lot of flack. I think partially because we're all a little bit afraid that what happened to Romain Ntamack will happen to one of our players, or to Dan Sheehan. But I thought that game really showed the importance of these matches. This was probably as close as you're going to get to Ireland starting 23, absent maybe one or two players, and as good as they were, there was definitely a lot of rust there. So I think having a couple of games at the start before the World Cup really helps to shake that off. It being rusty, it was still a very, very solid performance. There were no major mistakes in attack or defence. I thought we went through some very nice phases. I thought Ross Byrne's game management was pretty solid in implementing the attack plan that we seem to be going after. Our defence was great too. Hard to gauge that because against the kind of the lack of structure that England seemed to bring on attack. But I thought it was a solid performance from Ireland. I don't think they had to get out of third gear. I think we're going to have to see more from them to progress to the World Cup. But as a first performance, a first hit out for a lot of those lads, I thought it was pretty solid. If we get an update on Dan Sheehan, I'd call it a really good day at the office. And then to cap it all off, Keith Earls getting that try, 72nd minute. I mean, the stadium wasn't that loud at the start of the match. It was something else. I didn't think it was going to happen. I thought it was too perfect, but it was exactly what you wanted, and the finish was the exact amount of flair you want from a man in his 100th cap.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was going to move into this anyway, because we were going to run through the major moments, the major talking points of the game, in particular for the four-man panel we have. And I was going to start by talking about Keith Earls anyways, so might as well get into it. And as you said, it did feel like it was going to be too perfect, that he was going to score in the corner. I remember, I think the very first attack that Ireland had, which could have been Mac Hansen's try. I'm not 100% sure which it was, but I think Anthony Watson was just looking at him and just waiting, because obviously they had been caught out on that right hand side beforehand, and he's just waiting. But then when Bundy Aki throws that pass, and it's like slow motion, isn't it? Because you just know what's going to happen. You just know Keith Earls is going to get in the corner and this place is going to lift. And Jackie Hurley said on RT after the game, if there was a roof in Aviva, it was gone. It was absolutely phenomenal. It's a place that gets slaughtered for the atmosphere at times, but when Keith Earls arrived out with his three young girls before the game, when he came on for James Lowe, and when he scored, the place just lifted. I wrote about it last week. He's a Munster legend, but he's also an Irish legend. That's 100 tests for Ireland. He scored 36 tries. He's played over 200 times for Munster. He scored, I think it's 64 tries. Went on a Lions tour, scored 3 tries for them. Like, he's ticked every single box, and some players deserve the moment more than others. And I don't mean that about Ireland in particular, but just in general. And Keith Earls is one of them. You couldn't begrudge him of it. And it was a great week for him. And for those who've read his book and for those who followed him, like, my entire time watching rugby has been watching Keith Earls in a red and green shirt. And to think that he's not going to be there for much longer is sad, but he has left one hell of an imprint on the game as a whole. And I'm delighted he got that day out, because we look at, say, Conor Murray 100th cap, he goes off injured against South Africa. Thinking of Peter O'Mahony, he's on 95 caps. Chances are that 100th is going to come away from home, because even if it doesn't come in the World Cup, could be in the Six Nations, and Ireland start away from home there. And just it was perfect. It was the perfect day for Keith Earls, and he even went in looking for a breakdown turnover at one stage and nearly got his hands in it. But listen, if all we take away from that game, aside from the injuries, is that Keith Earls 100 cap and the whole place just gave their thanks and just lifted, then it's a great takeaway. And I suppose I'd pass it over to you if you want to add anything in about the Moy Ross Express. Stephen, have you, Anton?
Briefly, I think in my greatest testament to Keith Earls is, I think he's probably going to be known for maybe off the pitch more than on the pitch. Like, Keith Earls was probably, I don't think at any stage, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, you're a Munster fan, but has Keith Earls ever been like the best player on any team he's probably been on? Probably not. He's probably been like the top 2 or 3, but he still has his lasting impact on Munster rugby and Irish rugby. Every coach has come in, always loves him. Like, that's not a coincidence. He seems like a great man, even as well as being a great rugby player. I think that stands for even more the fact that even though he's obviously an incredible rugby player, but he seems to be just as loved off the field as he is on the field, and that's tough to do as well.
And it's funny you mentioned about like that personality on a daily basis or weekly basis in camp, and obviously people go digging for different things at times like these. And Andrew Conway said he's one of his best friends, one of the best players he's ever played with, and someone went looking at an Access Munster clip, I think it was, and there's Keith Earls working with the young backs before Munster played Wasps last season. Obviously Munster were battered by COVID cancellations of matches and things like that, players stranded in South Africa. And Keith Earls is there working with Patrick Campbell, teaching him, if you step off your left, if you run this line or whatever. And Munster scored a first phase try that Patrick Campbell was there for, and Keith Earls was celebrating right behind him. And funnily enough, when Keith Earls scored in the corner the last day, the first one up beside him was young Jack Crowley, a player same age myself, who would have watched Keith Earls coming through the ranks. And I don't think Bundy was going to let go of him. I think he was going to give him a hug for the final 10 minutes there when we watched it back. But that's that lasting impact. And David, I suppose you were there as well, so if you do want to add Anton as well.
Yeah, no, I thought it was a fitting occasion for the man, and to see him there with his wife and his 3 daughters. I don't have kids myself, but I have friends who do, and to be performing at that level while raising 3 kids, all I can say is his wife is undoubtedly a saint. But just to show what it meant to them as well. It's not just a go along because you have to go along thing. They seem genuinely over the moon for him as well. And anyone who's read his book knows the struggles he's had both mentally and physically. He's dealt with one of the strangest injuries I've ever heard of, and to come through all of that and to end up on 100 caps, and 100 is still not done. It's always important to remember. He keeps threatening to do another year, so he's got more in him. When you look at the names of the other 8 Irish Centurions, those are 8 of the best players to ever play for the country, and I think Keith has a very deserved place on that list. And I was glad to be there for it.
And I think we all were, to be honest. And we'll move on to the next big talking point, which was somewhat ironically a red card for a shoulder tackle for an England player after the week that was. Of course, would happen again, and it would be a Saracens player yet again, number 8, Billy Vunipola, dismissed following a review for direct shoulder charge to the face of Andrew Porter. And I suppose one thing that we'd like to point out, and I did point out last week, I really do think the bunker system works. There is an awful lot of confusion amongst match goers when it happens. They just see yellow card and assume it's a yellow card. But I do think it works, and that's great to see. But David, I suppose just first and foremost, looking at the tackle, it looked lazy, cynical. I don't think Billy can have any excuses, can he?
No, he can't. And I think that's one of the more concerning things about it is the carelessness of it. It's a high tackle. Like, I saw some people make allusions to Andrew Porter dipped. I mean, in the same way that anybody dips very slightly when they're just about to go into contact. Billy was high the whole time. He was not dropping. and I think the real thing that stands out is I saw someone posted a graph the other day of a list of I think it was 8 or 9 countries and the number of matches they've played this year and the number of cards they've sustained in those matches. I think England are on about 8 games and they have, I think it's about 6 cards. Ireland are on 7 games and they don't have any. Now, this isn't just a Ireland are great kind of thing, but there's a lesson in there in that this might be a genuine coaching issue. I mean, if players aren't getting low, there's a reason for it. And if the same teams, different players in the same teams are repeating the same offenses over and over again, there needs to be a conversation about exactly why that's happening. I don't know if World Rugby are going to do anything about it except to continue to punish those players. But if it does keep happening, then they need to keep punishing it because, especially with the some of the stories that have come out about the long-term impact of head contact, it's something we really need to cut down on. And I wanted to add to what you said. I thought the bunker was great. I had the benefit of having a ref mic on me, so I knew when Ben Whitehouse made the call. But I think it would be maybe not the worst thing in the world if they had it. I don't know. Maybe if the stadium announced that seems a bit over the top, but certainly flashing it up on the screen so people are very clear about what's just happened.
Yeah, no, that's fair. And even when they're looking at the replays, if they're saying this could go to review, because it did happen when the yellow card was dished out, which is important to note. And Ed, you're a Gloucester fan. I will be honest, I'm not sure what their disciplinary record is when it comes to these things. But we did touch on a podcast last week about coaching and how if coaches are coming out constantly saying, oh, well, there's mitigation here, there, and everywhere, they're probably part of the problem. Kevin Sinfield was one of them. And just look, a week later, Billy Vunipola sent off for the exact same tackle. So I suppose, like I asked David, can he have any excuses? But from an England fan's point of view, this must be incredibly frustrating.
Yeah, it's baffling. And actually, there's 2 aspects to this. First of all, obviously, you've got the Owen Farrell issue, which we won't rake over old coals. But when you've had that issue the week before, and it's really become a heated issue as well, surely from a coaching and training point of view, you're going to be extra careful, make sure all the players are really on it and dipping and making sure they're getting lower. The thing that annoys me about Vunipola is, as David said, he was never dipping. There was no attempt to drop his height, and then the laziness aspect of it, his arms tucked. What's going to happen? So even if he gets the body position right, the chances are, if a player does dip late, you are going to take the head off with his shoulder because that's the way your technique, so to speak. The biggest frustration is it seems to be a Saracens issue as well. So Saracens have had several of these across the season. Obviously, Gloucester, as a Gloucester fan, we had this exact issue with Owen Farrell at the beginning in January. He went to tackle school. Obviously, that worked. And the other aspect to it as well is, and I know this from speaking to mates who still play the game, the RFU are reducing the tackle height in the amateur game below step 3. So what's that? There isn't really an equivalent, I suppose, from the Irish game. Yeah, so it's
happening here as well, but I'm not familiar exactly.
Okay. Yeah, so it's down below the sternum. So you've got massive issues across the game where people are getting frustrated with it. They're having to go through the whole coaching system and changing the coaching. And then you've got 2 of your supposedly best England players 2 weeks in a row taking people's faces off. It's not a good look. And then coming out and defending it. That's the other aspect. I mean, I think the one thing I didn't really agree with was asking Andy Farrell about Owen Farrell in the week. I don't think that there was much benefit of that. What his dad's going to turn around and go, oh, he's a knobhead. He should have been sent off. He should be banned for 8 weeks. It's not going to happen, is it? He's going to defend his son. But I do think it is a coaching issue. To cut to the short of it, I do think there's a massive coaching issue. England talk about their the defence and their discipline, and it's not just the tackling, the high tackles. The discipline by England since Borthwick's come in has been atrocious. We gave a lot of penalties away under Eddie Jones, but we seem to be giving even more away now under Borthwick. So it just seems to be a small part of a wider issue, which is the discipline is poor and it's top down. And again, is it any surprise that Kevin Sinfield's a rugby league coach and you've got blokes targeting the ball? And when you target the ball, there's a risk you're going to take somebody's head off.
Absolutely not. It's very fair point. And we had, I believe it was on Amazon only that Courtney Laws was pinned about this by, I think it was Sonia McLaughlin.
Sonia McLaughlin, yeah, right at the end. Really, really good question. So she mentioned the fact that Courtney Laws doesn't get red cards or yellow cards for high tackles. He is excellent at getting low. And you guys have seen Courtney Laws make hits, and they are ridiculous.
Yeah.
I mean, the one I remember was against the French bloke, Plisson, where he took his head off, but that's the whiplash. It wasn't actually contact with the head. And specifically around the fact that Courtney Laws has suffered from a number of concussions, and surely as someone who's suffered from that, where you've got people coming in high shots and stuff, you would be really hot on that in training. Again, the media training these guys get, they're not going to give you anything in an interview like that. You might get them on a printed article, but not on a TV article. And a TV interview just after a bit of a disappointing loss away in Dublin. But it's a really good question by Sonia McLaughlin there.
Yeah, no, it was, and she handled it well, to be fair, because we won't get anywhere unless we actually ask questions of the players and of the coaches. And like I talked about it in the podcast during the week, between Ireland and the 4 provinces this season, dating back to last, I suppose we used the New Zealand tour last June, there's been 4 red cards. That's nothing. Realistically, it's nothing. Like, that's half of what England have managed in the Summer Nation Series alone. And that's kind of the bar that everyone should hold themselves to. Not saying that just be like Ireland, but other teams have great disciplinary records as well when it comes to these things. And Stephen, I'm going to move on to you now for the last point, and I promise this is not rigged, wink, wink, but I'm going to open up the floor to a Connacht man to talk about the magic of Mac Hansen, player of the match. Absolutely mesmerizing. It was my first time watching him in person, and boy, does he move and get around the place and time everything brilliantly. But obviously, you know this better than anyone, but just on his performance at the weekend, I don't like to go too far because Mac Hansen could miss the World Cup. We don't know. But it feels like this is one of the best wingers in world rugby right now.
Yeah, I should have had my white scrum cap ready for the interview. Sorry.
And the Keith Earls shaved into the
yeah,
side with green hair.
I'm not going to go that far. No, Mac he's just special in so many ways. He's, I think, the ultimate definition of a free spirit, I think, is probably the best way to describe Mac Hansen. And I mean this in the nicest possible way. I love Mac Hansen. I've been lucky enough to have him on the podcast. He's been really nice to me. He's incredibly physically unintimidating. Does that make sense? Like, he doesn't, you'll never see Mac Hansen on, if you didn't know who he was, you saw him at rugby field, you wouldn't be like, that guy's really, really good. Like, he's not ripped, he's not super tall, he's not really bulky, and yet he's out here and he's winning man match performances. I think that's his 3rd now for Ireland, or 4th potentially. He's got 7 tries now.
3rd of this year, I believe.
Yeah, stuff for all, I think.
Yeah, 7 try and 15 starts now, I think, for Ireland, or something like that. So he's on pace to smash a lot of records if he keeps going this route. But no, look, what he brings to an Irish team, the most impressive thing I think he brings to an Irish team, and I've said this before, and I really, really do believe this, and I include the likes of James Lowe, Bundy Aki, Gibson Park, the kind of foreign-born players. They've changed the entire mindset of the Irish team. Ireland have been notoriously have taken themselves very, very seriously when it comes to rugby and World Cups and Six Nations. And they've always been good, but they've always had this like pressure on themselves. These lads, and I include Mac is one of the kind of ringleaders of this, is their attitude towards rugby is spectacular, where like they obviously take it very seriously. They're professionals, but they bring a sense of fun to the camp. Like the Keith Earls stuff in the hair. Like, can you imagine Johnny Sexton doing that? Or like, can you imagine any of the Irish lads who are like born and bred in Ireland doing that? No, they wouldn't. Mac does it. It's fun, and I think it's helped Ireland when it comes to dealing with pressure. It helps them when they go down to the likes of New Zealand and try and win a test series. And I'm hoping, and I do believe it will help them when it comes to a World Cup. There's obviously the on the pitch stuff with Mac that's amazing. He comes in field. Farrell loves that. He loves that with Lowe as well. He comes into the middle. He's like an extra playmaker. The kick across to get the ring rows in the first half. Farrell trusts him. He has that kind of free will to do what he wants. And, he's also got he's incredibly solid under the high ball at the weekend, which is, he's solid as a rock as well with Connacht. He's played fullback for Connacht as well. I think he potentially could play fullback for Ireland as well at some stage. He actually was asked about his favourite position, and he does say fullback is his favourite position. So who knows? It's an untapped resource. He just makes the right decisions a lot of the times, which again you wouldn't necessarily pin with his personality of being, the wild kind of card. You think always because Gibson Park is a bit like that, but Gibson Park can make the wrong decision at times. I love Gibson Park, and I think he's spectacular. But I feel like Mac doesn't have that clangor in him yet. Please, I hope I'm not jinxing him now saying that, but he's been spectacular coming in with Connacht as well. He's just taken to it so naturally. And, he played with down in Australia, and he played to a certain, degree of success, but he's just come into the Connacht and Irish setup and it's just blown up. And he's still 20, 24, 25. Like he's still, and he acts like it too with a lot of the hair stuff, but that's understandable. Like he is only still a very young man. But he brings so much to Ireland. I think the mindset and the psyche of, hey, we're trying to win, but look, it's not the be all and end all, or we'll give it our best shot and we'll live with the consequences. I feel like Ireland of past didn't have that, and the introductions of the likes of James Lowe, the likes of even Bundy and Mac has really, really evolved Ireland's mindset going forward, and I think it's only for the better.
No, absolutely. You can't have enough Mac Hansens in the world, and I've made the point of, rugby is always crying out for personality. We need personality. It's like, well, you have one in Mac Hansen. There's other guys. Think of the player who wore number 17 for England the other day. That is quite divisive in what they say in terms of personality. And then you look at Mac, and it's like, I'd say the only person he's ever pissed off is Oisin Dowling for that Buzz Lightyear tattoo, and it's like, that's
it was awful. It was awful.
It was awful. The Andy Farrell one isn't much better now, to be fair. But
no, it's not. But just with that, what you're saying is right. But the media won't take long. If there is a minor slip up from Mac, they'll come after him as well. Don't worry about that.
That's the other side of it as well, especially not being Irish born, as we know has been thrown around incessantly and not necessarily a lot. But he's a wonderful free spirit, great character, great guy. And again, sometimes you don't really notice how good a player is until you see them in person. And Mac was one of those. Like, I was looking forward to seeing Keenan versus Stewart, this so-called, two of the best fullbacks in the world. I don't believe that anymore, not even close to it. But Mac Hansen was just unbelievable. He was everywhere. There was one high ball he caught over his head. If he was from Mayo, we'd have said it's the Gaelic football background and all that. And I just thought he was unbelievable. And that freedom is one of the things that we really, really enjoyed. There's no skirting away from that. And like, England don't have that, to be honest. They really don't. I suppose their game plan is nothing more than a cure for insomnia. If you want to be really harsh. So Ed, as an English fan who's had to suffer through the last 3 games, what's your thoughts on their play with ball in hand or lack thereof?
To me, it seems, well, there isn't really. The game plan is clearly, we want to get the territory by up and unders, get Stewart under the ball, get Watson under the ball, whoever under the ball, and get some turnovers and go from there. And it's baffling because there are some really good ball players in that England side, and if you give them the opportunity to run with the ball and to try things happen. There are some exciting players in that back line particularly. But again, daft stuff like he brings Smith on at the end for the last 10 minutes and puts him at fullback, and within 3 minutes makes 2 line breaks, which is the entirety of the line breaks of the game for England. And there's a little bit of you in the back of your head as an English supporter thinking, well, that's him out of the World Cup. I mean, he's not going to play now because that's totally against what Borthwick wants. And that's the problem. It's so prescribed. The ball's coming out the back of a scrum or a rock, the bottom of a ruck, and it eventually will come to George Ford after Ben Youngs takes 5 steps. And it will come to George Ford. And he has got no option. He'll probably have one outside. He might have an inside ball. The guy outside will be a big forward. Probably Vunipola will go backwards, or Tuolangi will get smothered because everyone knows what's coming. and then do that for 2-3 phases. Nothing happens. Kick. It's awful. It's just awful. And this is, to be fair, this isn't just Borthwick. It was like this under Jones at the end of Andy Jones's tenure as well. And I think no England fan was expecting us to suddenly turn into the Harlem Globetrotters and start throwing around the ball like a Northern Hemisphere Fiji. That was never going to happen, particularly when you look at Borthwick did at Leicester. It's a very similar game plan to how he played at Leicester. It's a very it's negative. It is a negative game plan, but I suppose it's an easy one to adapt for players coming in from all different sides. It's just crap. I mean, that's the thing as an England fan. He's just like, well, I can't get excited about it. Me and 4 of the lads on the pod, we're going to Lille for 2 of the games, Chile and Samoa, and you're like, well, the more exciting game is going to be Romania Tonga, because it's just going to be boring. England will win those games realistically. I mean, Samoa might give us a bit of a stretch, but they haven't got the depth. So you'd expect England to win those games quite comfortably. They'll probably beat Japan quite comfortably. They might lose to Argentina, but we'll get through to the quarterfinals playing really average rugby. And the daft thing is, you'll probably end up at the semi-final because it's Wales or Australia. Yeah. And it's, I don't want to again open up sores here for you guys, and the fact that the draw made 5 years ago, whatever it was, and we've ended up with the stupidly heavily weighted draw. But as an England fan, it is baffling that England could quite easily get to a semi-final of the World Cup without really having any sort of ability or skill in there. The only thing that's positive from our point of view, I think, as English supporters, is the likelihood that Owen Farrell will now be banned means that we're going to have George Ford or Marcus Smith at 10. I'm hoping that the weekend we're going to see Alex Mitchell come on and have a game against Fiji, which means that hopefully that will give a bit more. We'll see a bit of an impetus there, because he's a far better, superior scrum half to the other 2. Despite how much I do like Danny Kerr. So there are some positives there, and I can see if almost by luck rather than judgment, England could end up with a much better lineup and a more exciting lineup. But at the moment, it's just dreadful. And I really wish that we played even half as well as the Irish did on Saturday, with the options you have on every phase, pretty much.
One of the points that I heard made in a podcast today here was the difference between the 2 teams was Ireland looked like they knew what they were going to do on phase 3, 4, and 5. England didn't look like they did at all, and that's not what you want to hear. Not 3 weeks out from the World Cup or whatever we are now. Like, England have probably looked out doubly insofar as Japan have fallen off the face of the earth in the last 4 years. So now what was a 3-horse race feels like 2, maybe 2.5. Maybe the winners of Japan and Samoa, one of them could, but like it looks unlikely now. And we'll talk about that maybe a little bit later, because I want to talk about next weekend's games anyway. And well, I'll just come to you, David, for the next part, and just want to look at, but from a tactical point of view and a game plan point of view, but also how the game unfolded. Just, was there anything in Ireland's game that impressed you or maybe even worried you on Saturday?
Yeah, so in terms of game plan, like I said, there was a lot of rust, but I think you just touched on it there. We seemed to have phase plan attack pretty well mapped out, and I thought Andy Farrell made a point in one of his last press conferences where they asked him, "Have you held anything back for the World Cup?" And he said, "We have so much held back, it's fallen out of our sleeves. Like, you wouldn't believe how much stuff we have held back." But I thought the phase play attack we put together in that match was excellent. I thought Roth did a very good job of implementing it. Obviously, credit to the attack staff or the attack coaches for coming up with it. But I thought, what really impressed me with our phase play was, and it really came out because obviously I was at the match, but it really came out. I've watched the match back 2 or 3 times since. Ireland have this really good ability to alter the point of contact just before it happens. So Ross Byrne will take the ball as the first receiver, and he'll pass to, the head of the pot of forwards. Maybe it's Cian Prendergast, and Prendergast will offload it, tip on inside to Andrew Porter's run on his inside, and then Porter will offload it back out to another back. And the point of which player you're going to actually have to tackle could change 2 or 3 times in the span of a second. And it makes it very difficult for oppositions to work out exactly where the attack is going to come from. And even if it doesn't create a line break, it just means that the players who do eventually carry the ball into contact are able to hit soft shoulders, they're able to get a couple of extra meters in contact. And it keeps the defense guessing. It keeps them on their toes. I thought it was very well done when we had two tries, one from Hansen and one from Lowe out in the wings, where we just did this very good job of pulling the English defence inwards. Even at some point, Rossburn himself, I know he's been criticised at times for not being a line threat. I don't know if he was actually a line threat now, but he did a good job. And he did run at the defensive line once or twice just to create this idea of closeness. And then as soon as the play was on, Gibson Park would call it, Rossburn would call it, and you whipped the ball out wide. And Hansen had to step inside Freddie Stewart, but James Lowe just walked over the try line. So I thought that the amount of planning that goes into this, it's not quite as prescriptive as Joe Schmidt. It almost seems like they plan out moves that'll work in any situation, and then it's up to the players to go, okay, we're going to use this move in this situation, or we're going to use this move in that situation. And they can, I think the reason why it looks like Ireland have their Friday's play planned out 3 or 4 moves in advance is because they have this set of moves that they can apply to any given situation. And I thought the attack, while we didn't see anything like, say, Hugo Keenan's try against France, we just saw a very good, consistent face play attack. And I also thought defense, the defense was stout. We had the one try that came off of, I think it was a loose pass from Conor Murray that was knocked on by Crowley. Not really Crowley's fault. It was on his fingertips, and England got over for a try off the next run of play. But other than that, we kept them out. The defensive life speed was fast. Ringrose was putting in hits like he didn't like the other guys, which isn't possible because Gary Ringrose is a very nice guy. But I just thought all of the pieces are there. There was a lot of rust on the play, but if we could, I think 2 or 3 games from now, even if we just implement that game plan again, we'd hit 4th or 5th gear, cruising.
Stephen, do you want to add anything maybe on the impressive point, or maybe even something that may have worried you? I know a lot of people are on about the line out, but if there's anything else you want to throw in there first.
On the worrying side of things, and again, I'm not going to pretend like I'm an expert, but I've heard enough people talk about now about the scrum. I agree with Ed. I think sometimes it's just an absolute lottery, depending on how it's called. But I've heard for a while now that Ireland's scrum is it's definitely a weak point when it comes to going to the latter stages of a World Cup. We haven't really seen it being dominated. Like, we've played South Africa, we've played New Zealand, we've played France, and no one has dominated the Irish scrum. But it's, when you're looking for probably weak points in Ireland's play, or at least in Ireland's set piece, it looks like scrum, especially when playing South Africa in a group game and potentially playing France with their pack, it possibly could be an issue. Porter, I know people kind of highlight him as sometimes he can be, I don't know what the best way of saying it maybe, but he treads the line of legality and illegal stuff. But again, I don't know enough about the scrums to really say like, oh, here's what he's doing wrong, or here's what another team might choose to target. We haven't seen it really be a worry yet, but again, enough people are talking about it where maybe there's something there to be seen. In terms of, obviously, from an English side point of view, the worry has been the attack that we've already gone into depth with. But I just want to say, like, I feel bad. I feel like we're kind of ganging up on Ed here, being so disrespectful towards England. But like, you have to put your like, try and place yourself into the English players. It must suck right now to be in that camp with, like, they don't want to play that style of rugby. Like, they have, you said the back players. Like, I would be conscious of writing off any of the English players over the next year or two if Borthwick is still there. It's a shitty situation. You're being told how to play. I think Borthwick's going for, like, we're going to be tough to beat rather than trying to win, which is sort of, I think, what Gatland's going to do at Wales. But just being conscious of it, it must be a pretty shitty situation to be in when it comes to English players. What impressed me with Ireland's tactics, I thought, to pick up on what David said, defensively we were really good at, I think, picking when to go for jackals. Especially big momentum jackals. Like, there was a few times where England would make a bit of a break, and within 2 or 3 phases Ireland would win that turnover penalty, and that is just so huge when it comes to momentum for the game, and just kind of those little wins that are huge when it comes to especially massive games and later in the World Cup. Having that ability to do that, I think it happens too often to be a coincidence, I think. So that's what really impressed me, I think, with the Irish.
Yeah. Do you want to jump in then finally?
Yeah, just one other little bit. And by the way, don't worry about ganging up on me. I mean, absolutely, you're entitled to after the weekend and after the last, I don't know, 2-3 years. The only thing I'd say actually in terms of the squad selection, because there's been a bit of talk in the English sort of rugby Twitter bit of things, which is about 2007. The players kind of did a little bit of mini revolt, and they turned it around. I think Austin Healey was mentioning it about the fact that it was really poor getting the build up to the World Cup, etc., and they got to the final and stuff. The slight difference this time, I think, is I don't see the players having the strength of character in the same way that they did in 2007. 2007, you had likes of half the team had won the World Cup, so they knew from their point of view they had a strength behind them. They could turn around and go, well, actually, this isn't working. We're going to do it this way. I don't really see that in this squad, and it almost feels like you would expect when like Wales, for example, right? They only announced the squad today as we're recording. So you kind of all go, oh, we're going to do what Gatland says, and we're just so we can get in the squad, and then we can try to chance our arm a little bit in games and see where we can get to, because we might then find something magical. Whereas with the England team, they were picked like 4 weeks ago. So what have they got to lose? If it's really not working now, you can kind of say it, because you're not going to get dropped. You're not going to get chucked out the squad. And that's what's frustrating. I think I take your point, Stephen, about don't write off the English players. I just think it's just that they're not going to get they don't seem to like they want to even try and revolt or go against what Borthwick's telling them to. So I'm kind of a bit resigned to it's going to be a bit crap for another year, and then we might get somebody a bit more exciting.
We'll wait and see, I suppose. And I suppose I just want to push on, lads, and kind of make a run through, what I called in the Italy game, kind of the bolters, the sitters, or sorry, not on that. I'm on the wrong question. Apologies, guys. And I just want to run through the two Match 23s, actually, first of all. And against my goodwill, I'm going to start with Steve. I'm going to give you the forwards, knowing that Dave could launch an attack on some of the backs, waiting in the wings. But Steve, would you mind taking through the Irish forwards, how you felt they fared individually, both kind of starters and replacements?
Yeah, absolutely. Look at the front row, Porter, Sheehan, Forlong. You know what you're getting. That'll be the starting front row if everyone's healthy going to a World Cup. Porter is a phenomenal player, incredible ball carrier, but also has the passing abilities. Sheehan is probably the most dynamic athlete in the Irish team, especially for a hooker. We do need him probably to be healthy for a World Cup for us to go far. And obviously Tadhg Furlong is Tadhg Furlong. I think he just needs to get as many minutes under the belt as possible. I think will be good for Tadhg. The locks, Tadhg Byrne, James Ryan. I would argue Tadhg Byrne is possibly Ireland's most talented player when you look at it as an overhaul. I think he's just absolutely outstanding, and I'm glad to see him playing in the lock position, because I think that's where he's best. And James Ryan kind of has won me over the years. I always knew he was incredibly talented, but what I loved about James Ryan is he sets the bar, I think, physically for Ireland a lot of times. I always remember a couple of years ago, England came to Ireland in Six Nations, and I think they bet us, but they absolutely bullied us physically. And the only player that stood up that day was James Ryan, and actually wanted to have a bit of a fight and have a bit of a scrap, and stood up to them. And that really, really impressed me that day, because a lot of the other lads kind of didn't want to do that. And I think he's he seems to be a real leader in the dressing room. And he, as I said, sets the tone physically. Back row, Peter O'Mahony. I think he's my favorite player of all time. I absolutely love him, and that hurts because I really don't like Munster. No offense, Caelan.
No,
not taken. I just love the fact that he's kind of adapted his game as the years have gone on. He's obviously an elite line-out operator. But then you see him for like Bundy's try. He's in the open field, picks the right passes. He always finds himself out in the wing. That can't be a coincidence. And and he always, as I said, makes the right decision. And just again, an absolute leader. You could put him in any sport, and Peter Manny would be a leader or a captain. I think he's just that kind of personality. And then in his spare time, like, plants petunias. It's hilarious. I love that side of him too for some reason. But Van der Fleer, look, Van der Fleer's world class. I think people sometimes I felt the last couple of months he hasn't been in his best form, but look, he's Van der Fleer. Was he World Player of the Year?
Last year.
Last year. You know what you're going to get with him. He's elite. He's ball carrying has been just incredible, and always a jackal threat as well. Keane Prendergast, obviously delighted to see him play well from a Connacht point of view. I thought, to be honest with you, if he had asked me a couple of weeks ago, I thought he would have been included in that first batch of players to be let go just because of his experience. But he's incredibly versatile, and he's done incredibly well in terms of last year with Connacht and even the few Irish appearances. I feel like he's almost tried to do too much when it comes to jackling and getting involved in rucks, just trying to impress too much. He's totally toned that back a little bit. He's a very good ball carrier. Carries what makes his tackles, and kept himself out of trouble as well with the referee, which I think sometimes can be an issue with him. But I think, and I hope I'm right in this, I think he may have booked a seat in the plane with that performance at the weekend. We'll only see. But on the bench, Rob Herring come on. Look, at Herring's an incredibly solid player. The ceiling isn't outrageously high, but the floor is also not outrageously low. Nothing amazing, nothing poor, but he's never going to really get you into any trouble. But I think I just prefer, obviously, Sheehan's dynamism. Lockman, I didn't really have a ton to think about. Lockman just come on. It's very tough for a prop to come on really and like stand out and make an impact. But I think he's very good. Finlay Beelum also came on. Look, Finlay's already answered the questions, I think, earlier on in Six Nations. Anyone who had questions about Finlay doesn't have those questions anymore. He's more than fitting to be a sub for Furlong if that's the case. But I think now we're in a beautiful position where if Tadhg can't go in one of the big games and Finlay starts, we're not that disappointed with that, which is a huge compliment. Joe McCarthy is like the modern day lock in nowadays, where he's just can do everything. And I didn't want to like Joe McCarthy because the narrative of again was like this lad's come in from Leinster and he's only young and he hasn't played a ton. But then you see him play and you're like, oh, God damn it, they've done it again. It's like super powerful, just an amazing athlete. And then I thought Caelan Doris was really poor and I wouldn't bring him to the World Cup.
Yeah,
there's not much to say about Caelan Doris, really, is there?
No, it's disgraceful he wasn't on long enough to make it a claim for man the match. That's really all you can say at this stage.
I'm sure they hadn't thought about it though. Do you know what I mean? They had a little think about it.
Yeah, probably. And Stephen Ferris reckons, if it was up to him, he'd just give man the match, Keith Earls, and then apologise to Matt Hansen or whoever. But he got the try.
Matt could have been okay with that, I think.
Yeah, no, he'd just take a picture with the side of his head and it'll be fine. We'll get on to England in a minute, and myself and Ed will run through them. But David, just quickly, the Irish backline certainly felt like it was humming. 4 tries, or all 5 tries coming from the backs. Even if it wasn't a perfect performance, but I suppose just going through it from 9 to 15 and 21 to 23. All positive all around, do you feel?
Yeah, I thought broadly speaking it was pretty positive. Started the start and going from there. Gibson Park obviously back in the saddle. It's good to see. He was his usual self, assured, quick delivery, fast off the base of the ruck. There were a couple of times where it was a close one. England did attempt a couple of Kenner rucks, but he was usually quick enough to get it out of there on time. Had a couple of wayward passes. I think 1 or 2 wayward passes, but I think we put that down to rust. He was broadly speaking very, very, very solid. Slotted back into the backfield quite frequently, and he kicked pretty well too. Ross, I thought, managed the game very well. I think that's his strength. He's not a massive line threat. He's not a running back. He's no Bowden Barrett, but I thought he managed the game incredibly well. I thought he set up the attack structure quite well. As with Gibson Park, threw 1 or 2 loose passes, but I thought, looking back on the game, I could actually see the players they were supposed to pass them to. And it was just a case of miscommunication or possibly poor positioning. So I think that's just a bit of rust that will get worked out. I think the biggest negative Ross is going to take away from that day is the kicking off the tee. 1 from 4 shots is just not up to his usual standard. It's something he usually prides himself on. And I think I don't know, to be fair, those 3 shots were touchline conversions, but touchline conversions are usually where he eats. So I think that'll definitely be something he looks to as a work on. The centers I thought were superb. I mean, Ringrose was his usual good self. Like I said, putting in some very strong shots. I think there were a couple of instances where England players definitely came off quite roughly. Oh, actually, to go back, Ross Byrne sat down Elliot Daly once, which was funny to watch because I'm not used to seeing Ross Byrne as a tackler, but that looked like it hurt. But yeah, Ringrose was good, good and loose, good in defence. A couple of his customary missed tackles, but I thought he was very solid. Aki, I thought, had a very, very good performance. I thought he showed, I think because he's such a big, strong man, he got this, possibly a little bit like Stu McCluskey, got this reputation as just being a very strong ball carrying 12. But he is one of our better distributors in the back line. I think the pass he sent over the top to Keith Earls for his try was an absolute peach. He did something similar to put I think Shigo Keenan away in the corner at one point as well. He's just a phenomenal distributor of the ball, as much as anything else. So I thought he had a.
It wouldn't be like the certain members of the Irish media to not know that players have multiple facets to their game, or certain players anyway. You know,
particularly Connacht players.
Or Munster, or Munster second rows as well.
Yeah, because Munster don't get enough media attention. So I thought
none.
I thought Aki had a very, very good game, and as weird as it might be to say, because I suppose he's aligned as well, but it's because Robbie Henshaw is such a well-loaded player. I think Aki is definitely our starting 12 at this point in time. So I thought he had a fantastic thing, and then to go from that and then to say it gets better the further back you go. I thought our back three were excellent. Starting from the bottom, even though it's very good performance. James Lowe was he was imperious in the air. His boot was spectacular. You could see it every so often. I think the 50-22 is his favorite rule because he never isn't going for one. He fired off a couple of lovely little spiral shots. None of them came off, although there was one that dropped, I think, between the English fullback and someone.
I think it was.
Yeah, just neither of them could decide which of them was going to get it and ended up bouncing into touch. So I thought he had an excellent game. And one thing that sets him apart, because I know there was a bit of a toss-up between him and Stockdale, was and I think this comes from his Southern Hemisphere upbringing, always looking for an offload. If he can get an arm free, he's going to get the ball away, even if just to save you the trouble setting up a ruck. So I thought he had an excellent game. Keenan was exactly what he always is, safe as houses, under the high ball. Somehow manages to always make meters after contact, despite not looking like a rugby player. He just has this very good running style, and I thought he was superb. And then Hansen was just everywhere, running, kicking, playmaking, catching. He was unbelievable. I think when it comes around to Player of the Year, he's going to be in contention because I think he's got 5 Player of the Match awards out of 15 matches played. It is just an unbelievable return. So I think he was really phenomenal. And just to very quickly run off the bench, Murray, I thought was fine. I thought, in the positive column, he comes on and you're reminded this guy's 6'2". You put him into tackles, he can really put a shot on people. I don't think he got long off the field to really make a massive impact, but he didn't make any massive errors, except a bit of a loose pass to Curley. But I think that was just because he really wanted to pass to Keith Earls. Jack Curley, similarly, I think he came on earlier, but he really only got 10 minutes at 10 because he initially, I think, was playing at 12 with Ross Byrne at 10. I thought he slotted his conversion very well. Once again, it was a touchline conversion. And I think that the best thing you can say for Jack Curley is he is not phased by test level at all. He looks at home there all the time. And then to finish with the best, Keith Earls, just to come off the bench, to finish with that try on his 100 cap was something else. And I thought even as an improvement on 2 weeks ago, Italy, he looked a bit rusty. This week, he just looked all professional. And I think it would be easy to be overcome by the momentous occasion. He just looked like he was enjoying himself out there before the match, during the match, and afterwards. So, I thought across the board in the back line, it was a good day for Ireland.
Yeah, and I suppose we're kind of moving on from one of the standouts to a bit of a lower point. But because we have you on, Ed, we're going to just run through the English side, myself and yourself, and I'm going to get you to go through the forwards in particular.
Yeah, sure.
It really wasn't a day for anyone really of that 8 that kind of stood up and said, you know what,
No.
I'm here. It was kind of same old story as the Welsh games. Did you feel?
Yeah, I mean the problem with so Genge, George, and Stewart, they're not the most powerful scrummages. I mean, Genge gets a lot of plaudits for his play in the open field, but I do think he has a bit of a weakness in the scrum. And Will Stewart basically got his arse handed to him to a point. He was getting ping left, right, and centre. For about 5-6 weeks at the back end of last season in the Premiership, it looked like he'd worked out how to scrummage again. That's obviously been coached out of him again. Jamie George is an interesting one because I think from a set piece point of view, line out point of view, he is very, very consistent, and our line out generally has been one of the positives throughout Borthwick's reign. I think Atoji and Ribbons and Laws did well to disrupt the Irish line out. I think there was quite a few. Well, it seemed to be a few overthrows and a bit hit and miss for the Irish line out. And then it's difficult, but because it was such a poor display by England. Ben Earl is pretty much the only positive from the autumn series or the summer series, however you want to call it, from an English point of view. And I'm not talking about his really lovely celebrations for knock-ons and not straight throws. This is just he has been the one player who's looked like he's going to get a bit of go forward. And then we come on to, we've already mentioned him, Bibi Vunipola, who was poor anyway. And then to top it off with his stupid tackle. The biggest problem with Vunipola is that if you talk about Vunipola 4 or 5 years ago, one of the best back row players in the world, he isn't the same player anymore. He's made of glass. He gets injured quite a lot, and he's our only specialist number 8 in the squad, which is it seemed a daft decision at the beginning. It seems even stupider now because he's going to probably miss the first 3, maybe 4 games of the tournament. So yeah, overall crap is my summary of the English pack.
I'm before I'll take the battle, and before we move on to it, I just want to ask really quickly what I asked Tom in the preview. What would be your starting English back row as it stands? I know Vunipola, there is obviously the question mark about the hearing, but which way would you go with the back row in particular? Because it's quite contentious.
Yeah, I would have Willis starting. I'd have Willis. I mean, you're going to have Earl because we assume Vunipola's going to be out. So let's just put him to the side. So you're going to have to start with Earl at 8. Because he's the only one who's really kind of played there. Maybe Willis could possibly play at 8. I probably prefer Earl. And then the daft thing is, a number of coaches think that Courtney Laws is a back row. I think he's a second row, so I'm obviously wrong. But they're going to probably play Laws in the back row. I do actually like Chesham. I think he's a really good young talent, and it's remarkable, really, that he's even in the squad or he's going to be playing potentially. So I don't know, but I'm going to say it's probably going to be Willis, Earl, and Laws, combination of those 3. And to be honest, against Argentina and Japan and Samoa and Chile, it won't really matter. That's the that's the deal and end all of it.
I would
Can
agree.
I
with you.
interject for a second?
Yeah, no, go on.
I just want to talk about it before we get the celebrating and the flack that England are getting about the host. I don't mind it. Am I the only one who doesn't mind it?
I don't really mind it either.
It's
just that obviously it's a nice stick to beat England with because
Yeah.
we're playing poorly. When you're winning, no one really cares. It's just slightly irritating. And every side does it. I mean, Ireland do it,
Yeah.
France do it, everyone does it. It's just when you're losing 20 odd, 30 odd, 10, and you're celebrating a not straight line out, you just look like a bit of a dickhead.
Yeah,
I agree with that part too, but I don't think they're doing it necessarily to get other people's skin. I think they're trying to create a bit of a bloody atmosphere or a bit of I think they're trying to get themselves going a little bit, which I think I just don't see the problem with that. I agree with you. I don't think it's because it's England sometimes and possibly a lot of the Saracens issue. It's I think it comes a lot from that too.
Yeah, so I was saying before we started recording that that the rumor is, or the theory is, that the Saracens players started doing this a couple of years ago because the atmosphere at the Allianz, or whatever the hell it's called now, is so poor that they needed to actually generate something within their own with their own squad, and the Wolfpack mentality and all that nonsense. It's just as I said, it's slightly frustrating. I actually think it's probably something that the World Rugby could actually clamp down on a bit more, because it's within the laws. You don't have, the referees could quite easily say, actually, we're going to start reversing this and giving free kicks because you're over celebrating. It's within the laws, and we've seen it. NFL did it. They put in a new rule basically saying that if you start taunting, it's a flag, 10 meter 10-yard penalty, all the rest of it.
And then it is a contentious one in that regard, because some people like it, some people really don't. Personally, I think it's about picking your moments though as well. Like when it's a crooked line out, I'm sorry, Ben Earl, but that was not because you were standing at the tail. Like it really wasn't. It's because it was a crooked line. I think it was Rob Herring that threw that one. Pick your moments, pick your fights. Like I always look at, say, someone like Peter O'Mahony, who will celebrate his fair amount of penalties. I'm not going to debate that. But the vast majority of them are a 70th minute turnover or a 72nd minute line out steal when it makes a difference. And as you said, not when you're 20 points behind against a team who've had your number the last 2 years. I'll just run through the backline really, really quickly. Personally, I think George Ford was possibly England's best player, but it's more testament to how they play more than anything. He covered the ground well. Watching him, I try to keep my eye on him as best as I could. He covered the ground well. The top Ben Youngs again looked very prescribed, pretty much. That's kind of been the issue with England nines. Like Danny Care, yeah, he added a bit of stress there in defence, but that was one carry. It's not. We haven't seen enough to say he can do that consistently. Tuolangi and Marchant, you touched on earlier, they weren't noticeable. They really weren't. They were. If you wanted to be a real ass, you could say they're the fourth and fifth best players to play in the centre yesterday. Never mind third and fourth. Like they had no impact on the game. But for me, it's the back three that I'd be looking at. Like Elliot Daly is a good player. Didn't really do a lot. Anthony Watson definitely the best of them. I think Anthony Watson, you could make a case should be England's fullback just because of how he attacks the line and how he takes the game to teams, as opposed to Freddie Stewart, who, the more I watch him, the more I think he's not the hot prospect that BT and others made him out to be. He's slow to turn. He's not the greatest defender in the world. When you kick high balls to him, because he's a huge size, he's a very good person to retain ball. But that's really it. Like he's clumsy. He is slow to move. Like twice stepped inside for tries. I know he sprinted across and won them. You could definitely look at Elliot Daly for being a bit of a passenger for Mac Hansen's try. That's not what England need, especially when you're going to be playing this kind of off-ball brandy. You're going to be defending a lot. Once teams figure out that he's slow, or they figure out that Elliot Daly is consistently biting in, or that even, someone like Will Stewart is getting isolated in midfield, it just ever suddenly it becomes very easy to exploit these different targets, and teams are starting to do that. Ireland have targeted, Ireland really went after Elliot Daly's wing, surprisingly, and England kicked an awful lot down Elliot Daly's wing, but Ireland really went after him as well in the return of it. And I suppose it's a sign of their malaise. Marcus Smith got 10 minutes of fullback, as he said, and to be honest, I didn't even know if Marcus Smith was that fullback until he was there, the only one like 20 yards behind the play, and was like, oh, that is Marcus Smith. It's just kind of the way it was. But we are tight on time, so I like to kind of look at who's kind of bolting into the squad and who's a bit of a sitting duck in squads. I know it's different for England, Ed, so maybe just players who are coming into form or out of form more than because their squad is named, whereas Ireland's isn't. But I'll just start with you, Stephen. Have you any player who impressed and nailed on? I know you mentioned Keane Prendergast earlier. Is there anyone else, or someone who maybe failed to grab the eye with this day week Ireland squad being announced?
Yeah, it's tough just because of how comfortable Ireland looked to really pick someone who didn't really stand out. Yeah, I think in although the other side of it, someone who stood up. I think Prendergast was that player, but I think Prendergast was also the only player starting that had to put his hand up. The rest were pretty much nailed on. I think the only one that I would be worried for is Ross Byrne a little bit, just because of, I think, David, you kind of nailed it correctly. I thought he played pretty well, but what you bring in Ross Byrne for is his kicking off the tee. I think that's what he's there for more so than anything else. And it wasn't great, and it wasn't even narrow misses. A lot of the strikes were poor. And I think with Crowley and how just amazingly talented he is, I think it's tough. Ross Byrne I think will be third choice if he goes. I don't know. I keep hearing about this. Do you need to bring 310s argument? And the more I'm thinking about it, the more I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And Ross Byrne, I feel like if that is the case, will be the one who gets the chop. But it's very tough from that kind of team that started out. But I think Prendergast was the one. I think again he's the only one who really could, but he definitely did himself no harm with his performance on Saturday.
It was a day of very few standouts, but in terms of the wider England squad, who's playing themselves onto the starting 15 to play, it's Argentina in the opener, if I'm right.
Yeah, it's Argentina in the
And
opener. Yeah, I mean, I think Anthony Watson, and Ben Earl almost certainly now will be starting. I think probably Carl Sinclair benefited from the fact that he didn't play a lot on Saturday. So again, his stock has risen because he didn't get thumped and stuffed in the scrum. Other than that, really not a huge amount you can go with. Again, it is slightly different because that's the squad. And I think, to be fair, Borthwick knows his side already. I think the only hope, as I say, from an England point of view, is that just to do something slightly different is for Alex Mitchell to have a game on Saturday against Fiji, or next weekend against Fiji, and he has a good performance, because you feel that he's the one sort of bright light that's come out of this, and ironically it's because of an injury. So I think he's probably the only one I can see that if he has a good game, get him in the side, that might change a little bit of the dynamics for the England backline, certainly.
yeah, and listen, I couldn't argue with any of them personally. Being there, Tom Watson was very sharp. He always is. It's just hard to believe he doesn't have a club as things stand. That was the bit that struck me, realizing halfway through. And I suppose to go back to Ireland, I was going to mention Prendergast as kind of Ireland's main standout, because Mac Hansen's going to start anyway. That back three is nailed on and all that, and you could make a case for Bundy Aki because the 12 shirt is still up for grabs, and there was even some people saying bring McCluskey over Aki because McCluskey had a fine Six Nations, but I think Bundy might have the 12 shirt as things stand. It's a great position to be in. And I could say Ross Byrne didn't really impress me. I thought he ran the game okay, but he doesn't offer the threat that other out halves do, especially with Ireland's game plan. But then at the same time, he is steady, and maybe there is just something there for having that, especially with all the flux that Ireland have had at tens. But David, who'd be your two? It feels like anyone that is obvious or standout has kind of been mentioned. So where would you go?
Yeah, standout wise, I mean, I got to say the thing that everyone else said to start off. Prendergast, I thought was excellent. One of the things that really impressed me about him is he's relatively new to Test rugby. He doesn't even have, I don't think he even has that many gaps for Connacht. He's still a very young man. But in the first half, he was tackled inside of Ireland's 22, and he got stripped of the ball, and you get the ball turned over, and it'd be very easy to after something like that to go into your shell. But 2 or 3 phases later, I think it was Josh Van der Fleer and Peter Romani chop tackle the English ball carrier, and the man over the ball getting the penalty to get the ball back is Liam Prendergast. So he made sure that he makes one mistake and then he goes out and rectifies it. So I thought he definitely showed that. Like a lot of the mold of Jack Crowley, he is not overawed by Test level. He is more than comfortable at that level. The other man I thought did quite well off the bench for Ireland was Joe McCarthy. Now, obviously, I like Joe because he's a Leinster man, but a couple of weeks ago, I would have had Treadwell ahead of him based on experience and based on impact sub-wise. But I mean, McCarthy just offers this next level of, he's huge. I've met him once, actually. He's a massive man, which is funny because he's very young, so he's still a very young face, but he's a very, very tall, very wide, huge human being. His one point of weakness up until recently was that he gave away a lot of penalties. He was over enthusiastic at rucks, but he's massive in that up both in the Italy game and this weekend. To see him cut through the middle of mauls and just break them apart and somehow come out with the ball. There was a point where he turned the ball over up on the right hand side. It's nice to see an actual genuine turnover rather than just a turnover penalty. But somehow he popped up out of the ruck with the ball in his hands and chucked it back to someone on the Ireland side. So I thought he's definitely put his hand up, and I'd be very surprised if both himself and Prendergast aren't on the plane.
We'll move into the closing stretch now, because it's becoming very close that this World Cup will come. The final Summer Nation Series games take place next weekend. England host Fiji. Ireland are playing in Bayonne against Samoa. Bit of a logistical reason for that one, even though Ireland are, I believe, the home side. So Ed, I'll start with you. England taking on Fiji. I assume from a spectator's point of view, you want to see something a bit more expansive, but suppose a win would be nice too.
A win would be lovely. And to be fair, they're playing Fiji, so there'll be enough expansive rugby on one side of the pitch. So that's fine. I mean, I watched the France-Fiji game as well, and that was mildly terrifying. I mean, if I was Welsh, I'd be really scared, because Fiji, with another couple of weeks behind them in terms of a training camp, oh my God. But yeah, it's difficult to judge again, because Fiji, you know what they're going to do. They're going to turn up, they're going to absolutely run riot, but they're going to give lots of penalties away. And their set piece is not great. So England, you would think, on the basis that you fancy their set piece, probably will just be a case of, look, let's win the game. Above all else, let's just win the game. Let's get a bit of confidence ahead of Argentina, and away we go. I am actually really interested to see the Ireland-Samoa game, really, just because I think obviously you would expect Ireland are going to go out with probably a slightly weaker team than you would say see against England. But does Samoa go with a fully loaded side? Because that could be really interesting, because that's obviously England's fixture in the last group game. A lot of people are now saying that that's a real big banana skin, when probably 5-6 weeks ago no one was even saying that. So that's actually, I'll probably be more focused on the Samoa Island game than I will be on the England Fiji game, to be honest.
Yeah, like in its own way. David, as I said, Ireland in Bayonne taking on Samoa. There is the question marks as we record about, well, Dan Sheehan, Dave Kilcoyne, and Jack Conan have been left at home. Ronan Kelleher is a doubt. Obviously, Johnny Sexton serving the last week of his ban, so he's unavailable as well. So I suppose, what's your expectations for the game, and kind of what sort of team would you like to see? Probably, would you go chop and change? Would you go fairly strong, or how would you go?
I think it might be a mix of the two. Weirdly, I'd actually quite like to see. I'd like to see a very strong team with Jack Crowley at the back of it. I thought Jack played very well against Italy, but the team he was playing around, as good as they played, weren't, with the starting team for Ireland. So I'd like to see him with, our starting back in front of him, and with Aki and Ringrose behind him. I don't expect that to happen, though. I have a suspicion that we're going to go for pretty full bore, even just to shake off the last of the rust. But I would be curious to see. There's a couple of final calls to be made. I think the prevailing wisdom at this point is that we're going to end up going with a 19-14 split between forwards and backs. So I think the last questions to be answered, I think the one that we can't really answer at the moment is the hooker situation. Not knowing the full extent of Dan Sheehan's injury, and to be honest, not knowing the full extent of Kelleher's either. The talk is that he won't be ready for Samoa, but he will be ready for the start of the World Cup. So it'll be interesting to see if he's able to actually to come into the World Cup fully fit and stay fully fit for the duration. If not, it might be time to try out Stewart and maybe even Dermot Barron. But the ones I'd be interested to see would be Jeremy Loughman now has a sort of an unexpected opportunity with Dave Kilcoyne temporarily sidelined, still in the squad, but temporarily sidelined, to really say, hey, look, I can do this job as well. So I'd be interested to see if Loughman gets a shot there. And then in the backs, I think there's 3 guys left who have a chance to make the plane, but are in very real danger of not making it. And those are Stockdale, McCloskey, and Frawley. Of the 3 of them, I think the best, with the one with the best shot in there, is probably McCloskey. I think Frawley suffers from the fact that as much as I like him, there's nothing he can do that Jack Crowley can't also do. So if you're bringing a utility back, you don't really need Kieran Frawley when Jack Crowley can also play 12 and 15. And Jacob Stockdale just has not had enough time in the saddle. He didn't play badly against Italy, but if he was realistically going to be on that plane, I would have expected him to at least feature off the bench against England. So yeah, I'll be curious to see if I would imagine Farrell will possibly try to work those guys in. But I would say other than that, we're gonna go pretty strong.
Well, Stephen, I'll finish things off with yourself. I was going to touch on the Ireland squad with you anyway. What way you lean on some of the big calls? Obviously, David has mentioned the likes of Kieran Froy, Jacob Stockdale, Stuart McCluskey. The 1914 versus 1815 split is also one, but then there's the Hooper situation. So what way are you going now as things stand? And obviously, come Thursday when the Ireland team for the small game is named, it may paint an even clearer picture.
Yeah, I think 1914 is the way to go, because I think we are lucky to have a lot of players who can play a lot of positions and not just play them, but play them well. I just looked up Prendergast there, to many caps he had, David, because you asked, and he's 47 caps. But then I saw that he was born in the year 2000 and then nearly got sick. So that didn't feel good. So I do think Prendergast makes the plane. I do. I think Farrell has sort of showed his hand a little bit that he likes him, and we know now throughout the years if Farrell likes you, then he will hold on to you, or he'll at least keep you in his considerations. I agree that I don't think Stockdale goes. Just doesn't offer anything really different than what a lot of our wingers do, and as David said, hasn't really featured enough to really make that call. I think McCluskey misses out just because I don't think you need to bring him. I think Bundy is your 12, or Henshaw if you want to go down that route, and then Ringrose is your 13. Farrell really likes Frawley. I think that's pretty clear now. I think again can kind of play a few positions. I really like Jimmy O'Brien. I think Jimmy O'Brien's really, really good. I think he's a bit of a Hugo Keenan, where he's just not going to let you down. It's really tough. And Keith Earls, I don't know. It's a bit of a headache. I'm trying to work out as well who can I actually bring and then leave out. But I think the main ones to leave out, I think Stockdale McCluskey. Unfortunately, Ulster fans are not going to be happy with me, but I think they will miss out. And if I was being hot takey, maybe Ross Byrne doesn't go for the crack, because I think the question is, when would Ross Byrne play if you brought him?
Tonga and Scotland. Tonga and off the bench against South Africa, and then maybe Scotland, depending on Sexton.
But if Sexton's, have we seen Sexton not actually play when he's available and fit?
I suppose he's technically fit for some URC games that he never plays.
Yes, but I'm saying when it comes to the, I think Sexton's going to play more than we hope he plays.
I think Sexton will play as much as he can.
Yes.
I think there's the balance to that is, well, he played through the Six Nations and he got through them fairly unscathed. I think the balance to that is that he's 37 years old and he missed most of Leinster season because of injury, which is actually probably why Ross Byrne is in the team, because Ross really had to step up. So I really hope Johnny makes all the way to the quarterfinals, because I don't know if we're making it through them without him. But yeah, I don't know.
I agree. I think I like Ross. I think he's underrated, but I just wonder, like, do you bring someone who might play an accumulative 20, 30 minutes across group games, and then he won't play any of the last games if Sexton stays healthy? But then if Sexton doesn't stay healthy, you can bring Ross Byrne out. It's kind of like, do you want to waste one of those? Not waste is a bad word. Do you pick Ross Byrne as a spot in the back and then leave someone like Jimmy O'Brien or Stockdale at home? Is the question. If Sexton does pick up a knock, which let's knock on wood he doesn't do that, but then you can bring out a Ross Byrne afterwards. I don't know. It's an interesting talking point. I don't know what the right answer is. I'm sure more than likely Ross Byrne goes, but for your podcast, Kayla, I said I'd throw a little grenade in there for you.
As an English fan, I just say I am just sitting here just incredibly jealous of all the names you just mentioned and all the options you guys have got. But,
sorry, apologies.
That's all right. No. As I said, we're going to get to the semi-finals, but
that's true. We mightn't, as we're number one.
Yeah.
But that's Stephen. Thank you. That's a brilliant way to end the podcast. The Leinster fans already don't like me. Well, they definitely don't now. They can blame the Connacht fan though this time. But thanks very much, lads, this evening for joining me. It's been brilliant. Thanks to Ed, to Stephen, and to David. It's been great fun. It's ran on a bit of time, but it's been great fun recording. And here on my channel, as always, we have the pre-tournament previews. This week we'll be looking at the Pacific Island nations of Fiji, Tonga, and Samoa, as well as the run through of some of the tier 2 nations like Georgia, Romania, Namibia, and I can't remember the last one. So we'll also have further coverage of Ireland's final game against Samoa on Sunday or on Saturday, but we'll have that out to you by Sunday or Monday. But as always, thanks home to everyone for listening. Thanks to the lads for joining, and you can find the links to the lads' pages down below, as well as my own. Like, subscribe, do as you please. The lads have great content, and I hope I do too. So until next time, folks, take it easy.
Cheers.